Welcome, connoisseurs of fine common cardboard, to today's live stream. Glad to have you here. We'll be starting shortly. And here we go. Hello and welcome, connoisseurs of fine common cardboard, to today's stream and to this iteration of Pauper Commander Primers, where we take powerful Pauper Commander decks and we give them a breakdown in the way that I know how to do with the decks that I enjoy. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We're going to hop right in. We're not going to waste any time and we're going to get started. Let me know in chat if the audio is coming through clear and tell me how you're doing today. We've got Anthony Canese says, hey, this is going to be sweet. Rilsa RAEL. Let me widen this chat box. Sweet. Rilsa made me want to build an EDH dungeon deck. Absolutely. Yeah. For me personally, I don't play Commander, but the exciting thing for me is that someday I'll probably just build a purely initiative deck as maybe my one and only casual deck and just have every initiative card in it. I love this mechanic. It's been incredible for Pauper Commander as a format. And I think it's one of the better designed mechanics ever introduced to Commander. It really, really incentivizes a lot of things that just make games better and progress them. So we got Robocon saying, hi, what's up, dude? Glad to have you in chat. We got Thanatos, Praxia Mogamesh here saying it's good sounding. Fantastic. All right, folks. Well, let's get started, shall we? So we're going to start off with a little presentation here. And what we're going to do is run through some of the ways I think about this commander and the effects that it gives and the sort of dynamics we're working with. So Rilsa RAEL's first and most identifying characteristic is that she gains the initiative. And what folks who've explored deeply into playing the initiative has found is that any creature with the initiative on it for a reasonable cost is worth playing. There's even a joke that you could pay 4 mana for a card that has no other effect on it, and gaining the initiative would be that good. Trailblazer's Torch is a good example of that. Of course, with Rilsa RAEL, we get a whole hell of a lot more than just the initiative. Going into the initiative progresses us what's the Undercity, which is one of 4 dungeons, but it is the only dungeon you progress through when you gain the initiative. However, if you are in another dungeon, say the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and you gain the initiative, you progress then through there, gaining the initiative every beginning of your upkeep. So the Undercity is significantly more powerful than any of the dungeons ever printed, in that it is very proactive, and it does a lot to ensure an incredibly consistent game plan. A lot of you are going to be familiar with the initiative, but just to go through it really quick, we have the secret entrance is that first beginning spot there where we're going to search for a basic land. That means anytime we cast our commander from the command zone, we're going to get a basic land. Then we can choose to go through the forge to make a creature larger, or we can scry to. Should we take the forge, we have the option to go trap, make a player lose 5 life, or go to creature. We can Lost Dwell to go and create a treasure. We can draw cards, make 4/1s, and we can also go into the Throne of the Dead 3, which is really what makes this very similar to a Planeswalker, because if we can defend it, we get recursive value from it every single turn. We're getting an activation from our Planeswalker that gives us some repeat value. If we can defend it by protecting ourselves in combat, like you would protect a Planeswalker, then we can continue to reap the rewards of that. And if we hold on to it long enough or we progress far enough, then we eventually get an ultimate. And the ultimate here is quite powerful, and it's quite relatable to a Planeswalker. You could easily see a Planeswalker that says 5 loyalty. Look at the top 10 cards of your library. This would be insane. 5-10 cards of your library. Put a creature into play with 3+1/+1 counters and hexproof. Throne of the Dead 3 is not the only reason to play this. The other steps are also very, very good, but this is the one that oftentimes is the most splashy. It's incredibly powerful. Now, when we're talking about the Undercity, for this particular deck, for Rilsa, there are certain rooms that are better than others. However, none of them are really bad. There are times when you don't hit your land drops, and the Lost Well is there to piggyback you, put you on your back, and make sure you're still in the game. You scry 2, you get to those lands, you continue playing the game. If you don't have mana and you still need to play something, Stash can get you that thing. So even the bad modes, or quote unquote bad modes on the Undercity, are quite good. The left side tends to be the aggressive side. This is what you see people in Legacy doing. They're going turn 1 Lotus Petal Ancient Tomb into White Plume Adventurer, and they're going Forge almost always, unless they really, really need to continue hitting some particular thing, maybe an answer to a Merit Lage or something like that. In our case, we're almost always going to go on that left side, and it's only going to be rarely that we're going to go down into the Lost Well. All the other modes are excellent. Now, with the Undercity, I do believe for this deck, there is an ideal pathing. So let's talk about that. The first thing we want to do is we want to be going Forge. And that is because a lot of the threats in this deck are small ETB creatures that provide some value on ETB with evasion. And creatures with evasion really, really like to be buffed up because they can continue to chip in for damage the entire game. So this +1/+1 counters are going to help turn a 1/1 flyer into a 3/3, which is a 10-turn clock. It's quite fast. And it'll turn things that are slightly bigger into even bigger creatures. So the Forge is where we want to go. Now, the Trap and the Arena are very similar modes. The Arena is going to cause our opponents to apply pressure to each other. It also opens up them for attacking. We can attack them after we've goaded one of their creatures. The Trap deals immediate damage. However, both kind of translate to damage, but the key thing is that the Arena allows you to go into the Catacombs. And because Rilsa RAEL in this particular build is an aggressive deck that is looking to apply a lot of pressure early on, a 4/1 evasive creature for free is really hard to pass up. And that 4/1 is likely to do a lot more than 5 damage. So if we think about it, the Trap is 5. Goad might be some amount of damage. It's hard to say. I've goaded an 8/8 Fusion Elemental. I've also goaded very small things just to get them out of the way. I've goaded combo creatures to have them eaten by other things. There's a lot of things you can do with the Arena. But it's the 4/1 that means you're going to hit a lot more than 5 over the course of the game. And if it eats a removal spell, that's one other creature you had that can continue to swing. So this is the pathing I believe is best. None of these get you through the initiative any faster than the others, but some of them apply the more pressure. That being said, if you are drawing for an answer, you can go Scry, Arena, Archives, and that can help you dig for things. Now, we do have the ability to move through the Undercity many, many times in a turn, and in those cases, there's some really interesting heuristics around which ones we choose. Now, the initiative in the command zone produces a really powerful and favorable dynamic for us, wherein none of the outcomes are bad. Initiative in the command zone is one of the best ways you can create cognitive dissonance for your opponents. And what I mean by cognitive dissonance is that there's 2 problems and you can only deal with one of them. Other decks that create cognitive dissonance are Satyr Enchanter, where you have thing that's drawing cards when you cast enchantments, and you have creatures that become very big when you cast those enchantments. Same thing with Brunner Battlehammer, where you have a creature that's enabling you to freely switch a Great Axe onto a small creature, and then you have the creature that's killing you, and you have Brunner that's enabling it. And so the question is, do you kill the enabler, or do you kill the payoff? And that kind of cognitive dissonance is really good to create for your opponent. The cognitive dissonance we have here is that Rilsa RAEL has a very powerful ETB that we can abuse. However, if we let it live, then the player with the Rilsa RAEL begins to get additional combat triggers, which we'll talk about in a moment. So this is a really good pinch point. This is what we want to do to people. Killing Rilsa RAEL is a strong form of card disadvantage because not only do we gain something very powerful that is synergistic with our plan when we recast it, but we can recast it. So this is an important dynamic to consider with Rilsa RAEL, and it's one of the reasons why Rilsa RAEL, Blood Boil Sorcerer, Passageway Seer are all so good. If you deal with them, they come back, and they tend to come back with regularity because every time you cast them, you're getting a land. Now let's talk about that attack trigger a little bit too. Early on, that Death Touch gives us a form of evasion. And the early builds of Rilsa that I was working on played a lot of high value creatures, and it was leaning into rapidly getting to the Throne of the Dead 3 as fast as possible. Had a lot of ramp, had really big creatures that we could hit off the throne that made the throne even better. And the more modern approach that that Thanatos or Praxia Mogamesh and I have come up with is that in fact we don't need big creatures to get tons of value off of the initiative. And this is what's so cool is that in Rilsa incentivizes like good deck building with efficient, evasive, value producing threats that come down early and often in a similar way as Lurrus did in Modern. For those of you unfamiliar with Lurrus, go look it up. It's a 3-mana creature that allows you to replay permanents from your graveyard every turn. And what Lurrus did was that it actually made people build better decks because of the limitation around only playing CMC 2 or less creatures in your deck. So this has the same effect, which is it has incentivized us to play a efficient game plan with evasive creatures. And the beauty of it is that we make them big with the Forge. And when they die, it matters less. When things come off of the Throne of the Dead 3, it doesn't matter what it is. At minimum, it's going to come in as a 4/4, and it's probably going to be evasive. And 4/4s, that's really big. It's super big. If it's black, it's not dying to bolts, snuff outs. It's not dying to Executioner's Capsule. It's not dying to Spinning Darkness. It's not dying to, it's like dying to Galvanic Blast, Magmatic Sinkhole, Scred, and like not very much else. So the new concept here is that we want to lower the curve and then take those small creatures and make them big. And we want to play lots of creatures so that we're a very threat-dense deck that always is pushing out more and more pressure onto the battlefield and has lots of options when we hit the Throne of the Dead 3. It feels really good to have 5 creatures in the Throne of the Dead 3 and to sort of like pick your poison, be like, do I Edict the board? Do I progress into the Undercity? Do I gain the Monarch? Do I draw a card and play out a 5/4? Do I play my 4/4 unblockable? A lot of really good options there. Now, the next thing we got to talk about with Rilsa, and this is one of the reasons why I am playing Rilsa now instead of Passageway Seer, is that she is so thick, okay? 2/5 Death Touch doesn't die to much. All right, and let's look at the list. Lightning Bolt, Galvanic Blast, Thunderclap, Fiery Impulse, Bite. Some of the most common damage, Bite is Frostbite, are some of the most common damage dealing spells in the format. None of them kill Rilsa. Snuff Out, Doomblade, Cast Down, and Spinning Darkness. Spinning Darkness doesn't see as much play yet, but it will be. I'm playing Spinning Darkness in a lot of my mono, and almost all my mono black decks. It's just another, it's a free Lightning Helix. None of these hit Rilsa because she's black. And that heuristic that I've been talking about for a long time of 4 toughness black creatures is really, really important to pay attention to in this format. So none of those hit it. Capsule, Executioner's Capsule, doesn't hit black creatures. Aether Spellbomb, this is an awful target for Aether Spellbomb because I just get to recast it for 5, and it feels really bad. Pestilence, Crypt Rats, Cannonade, and Dragon's Breath, all just like, they don't matter. In fact, one of the ironies of this deck is that we have all these little creatures that die to Pestilence, and if we have Rilsa out and somebody plays a Pestilence and they wipe the board, then what happens is that Rilsa stays in play, and then Rilsa hits them for 7 every turn with commander damage. So Pestilence is not a good answer. It does damage and kill a lot of our stuff, but Rilsa, it does not, and that is really important. So super, super resilient. Now, with the keyword Death Touch, this is something that I had an epiphany moment about driving home from my house, and that is that Rilsa actually holds the initiative so much better than Passageway Seer. it has way more threats the way it's currently built, and Rilsa rarely attacks. She has Death Touch, so she plays amazing defense. And because we're playing Trinket Mage in the deck, we can tutor up things like Viridian Longbow. We could even play something like Shrine Steward if we wanted to find Psionic Gift, Hermetic Study, or any of the other pinger effects that deal 1 damage when you tap. That 1 damage has Death Touch on it, even if Rilsa RAEL dies, which means that we can then block things and then ping them in combat to play amazing defense in the command zone. So Rilsa is both simultaneously incredibly aggressive, incredibly grindy, and very, very defensive. It checks all the boxes really for me. So now, with that said, there is one limitation to Rilsa, and that is that she's 5 mana. Now, it's a small limitation because we've designed the deck to do tons of stuff on turns 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to Rilsa, and all of those things tend to involve scrying, drawing cards, things of that nature. So because of that, the 5 mana isn't too bad because we can ensure a high deal of consistency with Rilsa through our game plan. And because the initiative feeds itself, once you've cast Rilsa the first time, you're getting that land. If you need to, you want to hit other stuff, you can scry. And then, if of course, there are games where you go through the Undercity 3 times, and I can't. The most I've ever cast Rilsa RAEL was for 21. I cast a Rilsa RAEL for 21 in a game against Nate Diggity, and it's because the consistency of the initiative is just that amazing. It feeds itself, and it's ensuring that you can always redeploy it. And the whole deck is built to do that while also just digging for good stuff. Yeah, 21, Thanatos says that's nothing. All right, so with that, let's go take a look at the list. So here we are with Rilsa RAEL Kingpin in what I've dubbed Black Widow, and that's because she's a murderous mistress. That would also be a good name, Murderous Mistress. We'll have to look into that. And we're gonna start to see there's a pattern here, right, of very, very cheap and efficient creatures. And something that I'm actually working on is increasing that number of creatures. This primer is not meant to be eternal. It's only meant to give us a broad overview of what this commander does really well, what its incentives are, what its sort of payoff structures are, and this list will change over time. So this is not prescriptive. It's not to say that if your list doesn't look like this, it isn't good. It's only to say that in this particular build, with the incentives that I've identified, evasive, value-producing, cheap creatures are really, really good. And what's probably going to cost to get more evasive creatures in this deck is to remove some of the value and put in more 1-drops. The best starts in this deck feel like they come from 1-drops. So this right here will get larger over time. A couple of things you're going to notice is that there's ninjutsu creatures, and that's because our creatures have evasion. Whether they're on the ground and they have death touch, or whether they're in the air and they have flying, we're cracking in with creatures that we can return with ninjutsu. So there's some really interesting like Pauper style dynamics here, like with Is It Fairies and with like Dimir fairies and things of that nature, where we're able to deploy cheap threats, evade them in, get lots of retrigger values off of ETBs, or with the Saga, for example, and take a lot of game actions in our turn. One of the other things you'll see here too is that there are a couple of creatures that have a kicker, and one of them is Stronghold Confessor, and the other one is Ghastly Gloomhunter, which means that later on these evasive creatures can attack, they don't get blocked, we ninjutsu a creature in, and when we replay them, we upgrade them with the kicker. You're also going to see that there's creatures like Cavern Harpy and Shrieking Drake, which are basically alternative forms of ninjutsu that allow us to reuse our powerful ETBs. So those powerful ETBs are drawing cards with Cloudkin Seer, or with Dusk Legion Zealot, or scrying 3 with an Augury Owl, or edicting the board. There's a lot of flexibility in how you use these ninjutsu effects and how you use the bounce effects. We can also use those ninjutsu and bounce effects to pick up a Dimir Infiltrator and then tutor for cranial plating. This is a good cranial plating deck, and this is one of the things we can do with it. The other sub-theme that we have going on is that we have a lot of rogues. We have a rogue in the command zone and also a human, which makes Path of Ancestry really good in this deck. But because of rogues, there's some little tech here and there that we can do, like Latchkey Fairy, which allows us to prowl it in, and it becomes a 3-mana, 3/1 flyer that draws a card, which is a phenomenal rate. We can trigger this with Rilsa. We can trigger it with let's see, we've got Luteral Core does this. We have the Slitherblade is a rogue. Okiba Reckoner Raid is a rogue. There's also Jessian Thief. There is Wanti Fangblade, Aarakocra's Sneak, Shortcut Seeker. There's basically just a lot of ways to trigger that, including our command zone. We have all the initiative creatures, as you'd expect. And we have Gary, because Gary is just phenomenal to return and to reuse, basically. You'll notice that our draw effects are almost all attached to creatures. And that's because we don't want dead air in our deck where we're just drawing cards and not doing anything. We want to play stuff to the board that then draws us cards. We have a lot of Mass Edict effects. You can see 3 of these here are attached to creatures at ETB, which allows us to turn Throne of the Dead 3 into a form of mass removal. And that's really powerful. Recently, we replaced Rottide Garganta with Vraska's Fall, because Vraska's Fall is instant speed. It's very powerful for that reason. We have Debt to the Kami in here instead of a Mass Edict, because you really need ways to deal with Oubliette, and this is one of the ways to deal with it. You can also deal with a Pestilence, a Righteous Aura, Protective Sphere, a variety of other things. Curfew is a protection spell as well as an edict that allows us to really cheaply reuse our powerful ETBs. We have 19 artifacts in the deck, as you can see down here. And so that's made it a great cranial plating deck. And because Dimir Infiltrator is unblockable, we can transmute for the cranial plating. What we get in blue as opposed to black is a lot more venture effects, as well as we get another initiative effect. Also, Rilsa RAEL and the way it's constructed has made Trailblazer's Torch really good, because if we give a creature Death Touch and we equip Trailblazer's Torch, then when things block it, then we ping the things that are blocking it, and they die before we deal damage. It gives them a form of first strike, basically, while also taking the initiative. So you have 9 ways in this deck to do that, and all these effects are still very relevant, like Fate's Reversal, picking up a Dimir Infiltrator to tutor for cranial plating, or picking up a Fleshbag Marauder to make everybody sack a creature, or picking up a Ninja and then attacking it and reusing it. There's a ton of ways to abuse something like Fate's Reversal. Precipitous Drop is just a kill spell. In this deck, it's -5/-5, which is great. We can also play it early, and then once we complete the dungeon, it'll kill the creature that it's on. We also have a lot of life gain in this deck, and a lot of the life gain we've put in here is paired with another effect that's synergistic. Generally speaking, we're looking for lifelink, and that's because Rilsa RAEL, when she gives +5/+0 to something, turns stupid, tiny, meaningless creatures into cruise missiles. 6/1s are serious threats. 6/1 Menace, Death Touch, First Strike is a whole nother story. Late game, she is turning our threats into absolute monsters. And so when we have a Ghastly Gloom Hunter, maybe we kicked it, right? So it's coming out as a 3/3 and we're hitting for 8, or a Mokutai Ambusher, lifelinking for 8, Vault Scourge, lifelinking for 6. These are just really powerful ways that we can gain life so that we don't have to worry too much about getting hit in return. We have ways of buffering our life total. So you can see lifelink is the main heuristic here. Basilicus Screecher is great in this deck too, because it's evasive, and the Extort with all the game actions we're taking really tends to add up super quickly. And then we have our ninjas. So we have Shinobi, Shrieking Drake, Cavern Harpy, Hacker, Ambusher, Ninja, Moonblade Shinobi, and Okiba Gang Shinobi. Okiba is the most expensive of them, and this one is really here because when this connects with somebody, it oftentimes kind of ends the game for them. Like discarding 2 cards in the mid game, maybe you have 3 cards in hand and like 2 of them are really good. This is pretty heavy. Flipping this off Throne of the Dead 3 puts it into play as a 6/5 black creature, and then we can give it that Menace, First Strike, and Death Touch to crash in for huge quantities of damage on a creature that's very hard to kill, that is also going to dumpster their chances of winning if it connects. And then we have a small ramp package. And this ramp package of 8 cards helps fill out that 2-drop slot while also enabling turn 3 initiative plays. So one of the things that you've may be familiar with from Passageway Seer is that the whole of Passageway Seer is built around gaining the initiative on turn 3. 2 lands and a rock, and you're off to the races in your opening hand. In this deck, we can just draw, the Vicious Battle Rager or the Aarakocra Sneak, and both of these allow us to rapidly progress through the Undercity and to gain the initiative very quickly early in the game. If nobody's played any creatures out early on and we just go turn 3 into Vicious Battle Rager, our likelihood of winning goes up a lot because of that early advantage. So these are all 2 mana. They're all helping us make sure that we can also recast our Rilsa in the future. We have a little recursion package here that is a tidy little recursion package that's really built into our mana base. Tortured Existence gets a lot better in this deck because we have a lot of dinky threats that we're happy to switch for bigger threats. If we have an Underdark Explorer that's in the graveyard and we have a Fairy Sea in our hand, we're happy to pay a black to switch that out. And we've got a nice curve that goes, from 1 all the way to 5. And Tortured Existence is one way that we can reuse those, as well as creating a mono black control pattern where we start to edict the table several times a turn or just every turn. Our removal suite is a lot lower than probably what you're used to seeing in my kind of decks, or the decks I like to play, I should say, in control decks. And that is because we do have answers, but we are the hammer. We are asking the questions. We have answers, but they're more limited and more targeted. And our role at the table is to apply pressure on the ground to the players that are presenting the biggest threat, and then creating, we have our commander, which has Death Touch, which is allowing us to basically survive through the game. Getting that Verdian Longbow is tutorable with Trinket Mage. We can reuse that over and over again. And so we have less answers, but they're all potent. They're all very good. You're also going to notice we don't play Pestilence in this deck, which is crazy. But the reality is that Pestilence does more to harm us than it does to help us. And the difference is that we can hit Crypt Rats off Throne of the Dead 3, and a 4/4 black creature is still just a good beater. And then we can selectively use it over the course of the game in ways that kind of favor us. And that's why we're favoring this over Pestilence. And then here's a little look at our package of Trinket Mage targets, which are great. Bone Splitter's a really good one. Aether Spellbomb is one of the best removal spells in the format. If we don't have anything else going on, we can play Secret Door and start sinking our mana into the initiative. And then we have lands, of course, Everflowing Chalice, and then the Viridian Longbow. So, with that said, that is a look at Rilsa RAEL Kingpin here, and kind of hopefully this helped you all build a better understanding of why the initiative is so powerful, why it's particularly powerful in the command zone, why Rilsa RAEL works really well as an aggressive mid-range deck, and some of the play patterns you want to think about when you're progressing through the initiative. Now, a couple of things I want to hit on before we wrap this up and move on to something different is that Rilsa RAEL, giving you the initiative, does allow you to do something interesting, which is to parlay for the initiative and to collaborate with other players by freely giving it to them so that they can help you accomplish your goals. Okay? So, like with any deck, communication is really, really important with the table, because you can offer this freely to people as a sign of goodwill, allow them to get into the forge, maybe even the trap, and allow them to apply pressure where you think it's needed. And a lot of times you have the choice as to whether or not you're going to allow them to do that. So you are in the seat of making that choice, because Rilsa RAEL is an awful target to kill, and she's really big, so she's hard to kill. So the ways to kill her are always going to be limited, and your opponent might just choose to negotiate with you to get the initiative to help you with your game plan, like killing the combo player, without costing you much more than maybe a life a turn from some dinky attacker. So anyways, this is Rilsa RAEL. I think this is one of the more powerful, aggressive decks in the format right now. It interacts with the dynamics of the format right now with Monarch and Initiative incredibly well through these evasive creatures, allowing us to grab, to hoard, and to basically abuse the initiative. Now, there are a couple of cards before we leave here that I do want to show in the considering section. There's a lot of them. You can see there's 126 cards here. There's some duplicates that you're going to notice here. And a lot of these cards are perfectly reasonable inclusions. And so it's just a matter of identifying which of these cards and in which slots is going to be optimum for our game plan, which is becoming more and more aggressive the longer I've played this deck. So a lot of good ETB creatures here. A card like Sword Coast Serpent is very reasonable, mainly because if you ninjutsu this, you can reuse the kill spell, which is really dirty. Super, super cool. Cards like Tomb Raider, Sky Scanner, even something like Pilgrim's Eye are all reasonable. Library Larcenist is another one. These creatures that when they attack or do damage, they draw cards are kind of insane. I've regularly been drawing like 5 to 7 cards off of my Audacious Thief, which is the black version of Larcenist Prowler, or Library Larcenist. You just grant them Death Touch, they get in, they smack. So these are some of the other cards we were looking at, or that I've been looking at with this. We had the discard package used to be in here, but I decided that the value that we get to ourselves is more important than what other people lose. I would rather get something than deny my opponent something, and these creatures don't fit into that dynamic. There's also a couple of other ones like Displace and Ghostly Flicker, which obviously being able to re-trigger Edict, Monarch, Initiative is very good. However, we really aren't in the business of like holding up 3 mana to protect our commander or to like reuse it. I'm not a big fan of flickering creatures proactively. I think Ghostly Flicker and Displace are at their very best when we are nullifying a kill spell and getting value. So these are very reactive. And when we try to use them proactively, we are very likely to get punished or blown out for doing so because our opponent can get a 2-for-1 on us when they do that. So these cards, while they were good at one point, always sort of just felt like they were doing something the deck wasn't interested in doing. So we've cut them. Zombie Ogre is also a fantastic card, but look, this is 5 mana, right? It's an expensive card. We would probably rather, attack with our creatures, ninjutsu something in, play another threat. Like get 2 threats on the board at once than that. There's also protection spells. This is something you may see in other builds of Passageway Seer. These are all the 1 mana black flickers in a sense. When they die, you get to return them to the battlefield. And personally, again, this is kind of a reactive play that doesn't really fit with this particular game plan. So anyways, with that, we're going to wrap up this iteration of Pauper Commander Primers. It was really wonderful having you all here. I'm going to open up the floor for questions. If you have questions about the deck, any curiosities about how to play it, dynamics therein, I'm going to mark this video here so that we know when this particular video ends when we get to the editing. And and y'all can go ahead. Jin, welcome. Glad to have you on the stream. Came too late to the party. No, it's okay. You're all fine. You'll be able to watch the replay. Why did we do this to people? Thanatos says. As in, like, why did we build this deck? Or what's the? Can you be more specific with your question? If I'm to presume that what you mean is why did we inflict this deck on people? It's because we like winning, and this is a really powerful deck, and and truly. Playing the initiative in the command zone is really one of the better things you can do. I'm really looking forward to maybe the initiative returning someday. Anthony Canese says, can't tell if I like your builds or primers better. Well, thank you very much, Anthony. I appreciate the compliment there. And yeah, I actually haven't written a primer for this one yet. I have a little bit in here. If we go into preview, we can take a look. There's a little bit written. Looks like it's slightly cut off based on the way I have my picture here. But talks a little bit, talks at length about what I just described. So The idea is this video is to actually become like a video primer. So Robocon, these primers have been helping me with my Commander projects. I'm really glad to hear that. That's wonderful, Robocon. I'm glad this is valuable to you. The goal is to eventually have a really large, repertoire of these videos. And instead of, talking with a person at length about how or why they should build a deck, I'll just send them a video with one of these primers on it. So Jin Shooting Star asks, what are the worst matchups you've had with the deck? Well, I would say that right now in particular, Initiative in the Command Zone, and Monarch, and Big Blue have made evasive creatures really, really powerful. So cards that allow you to apply pressure when a board state is stalled are really important. And if you think about it, like Rilsa allows us to kind of freely like murk people because we can sit behind Rilsa with Death Touch as this amazing blocker, and it's always going to cost your opponent something when they attack us. And we just sit back, we deploy threats. They don't have haste, so they're blockers too. But in the meantime, we're cracking in for 9. And so any deck that's going to allow you to play cheap evasive creatures is going to allow you to challenge the initiative. And I think that's one of those places where it can be challenging for me, because that means I have to start balancing my attention with the person who's harassing me to get the initiative. So I think that's one thing you can definitely be doing. I would say too that if there's a really fast turbo combo deck, we may not be well suited for that, like you would if you were playing like Thrall Parasite or Passageway Seer. Passageway Seer has like 20 or 25 removal spells in it, edicts, removal, sweepers total. And so if you're playing Passageway Seer, you're probably going to be better against those decks. I would say those are maybe two. The thing is that turbo decks to me are never really my concern, because if they have it, they have it. But a lot of times it's a 3-card combo. And there are a lot of points of interaction along the way. And there are 3 players in a format where the answers are almost always better than the threats. So what I like about this is that we're applying a lot of pressure, which if you think about it in like competitive EDH terms or in CDH terms, you're pressuring the ad nos player so that they have less life to work with as a resource. Your life total is a resource until you're dead. And this deck can crank out so much damage with the Forge. If you go, Slitherblade into turn 2, Moon's, what is it? Let's go back here and take a look into, so yeah, if we map out a turn, we go like Okiba into, Augury Owl or Dimir Infiltrator. And then on turn 3, we bring in a Ninja of the Deep Hours, and we play a Stronghold Confessor. Then when we start forging, we're going to be hitting for like 10 a turn on like turn 4 or turn 5. And you can push a shitload of damage. And I'm having these games that I've been playing lately where you're swinging for 19, you're swinging for more. I mean, put cranial plating in there and it starts to get really rough. So it scales really well throughout the late game. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Jen. Early game, I would say, there's always that window where we don't have removal maybe, and somebody goes for a combo and we're developing, and maybe they're really, really fast. But generally speaking, the combined efforts of the table can stop that. And then decks that have a lot of evasive creatures. Decks that flood the board can be a thing too, but they pay a pretty heavy price when they swing on us. So I think generally they don't. Robocon says, I have 3 CPDH deck prototypes. That's fantastic. Yeah, always feel free to post in the Tryhards Discord if you have any questions about that. The link for the server is in the description below. And you're always going to be able to find some helpful people there, some friendly, helpful people to help you build your decks. Thanatos, anyone playing control and actively wanting you dead? Yeah, so I think your biggest risk with playing a deck like this is somebody having bad target priority. Like aggro decks have a job, and your job is to pressure the combo players in a lot of cases, and then build your deck in such a way that you can actually tango with the control players. So really aggression in this format, when it's done really effectively, is a deck that has a lot of aggression while also having the elements to push through to that mid and then late game if you need to. Jin Shooting Star says, I need to sleep. Have a nice time. Hey, thanks, bud. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining us today. So, yeah, so I would say, like, if you get a player who gets hyper fixated on taking the initiative away from you, that can be an issue, because then they, they end up taking your attention away from where you want to be swinging, which is the combo player, because aggro decks don't have as much reactive answers. They have a lot of proactive answers. And the proactive answer is to kill your opponent. So if you get somebody who doesn't have good target priority, who gets like stuck in their head that they need to take the initiative from you instead of working with you, right? If there's two decks that want to apply pressure at the table, there's no reason for them to come at each other. Like, they should be talking to each other about how they can trade the forge, how they can use the trap together. And so I think your biggest risk is if somebody gets hyper fixated on the initiative and then ends up king making the other two players. The initiative can be very distracting, but even then, like, this deck deploys a lot of threats, and those threats all help us keep the initiative. They all help us retain the initiative too. So if a person is concerned that they swing at us, gain the initiative, and that we hit them back to get it, we're going to be able to hit them back. We've got all the initiative, all the evasion to do that. And so, yeah, if we have a cranial plating in play, then our flying threats become very scary, and our opponent may not want the initiative, may not want that attention. So, yeah, I think that's a kind of a good answer to that. And Thanatos, you're right. I think even a control deck, though, I think, like, is going to struggle with the number of threats we have. And if it comes to, like, countering and killing Rilsa, then they're, like, putting themselves into card disadvantage while we beat them down, Pestilence is an expensive spell. Just keep that in mind. It's one of the best spells in the format, but Pestilence is expensive. Crypt Rats is expensive. Swirling Sandstorm, expensive, because you have to have cards in the graveyard. You have to have Threshold, which you won't have on turn 4. And it doesn't hit flying creatures. Breath Weapon and Fiery Cannonade are pretty good against this deck. But they don't kill Rilsa. And if you wipe the board of creatures, then Rilsa just buffs herself and hits you anyways. So it's... I mean, Rilsa RAEL can one-shot you with Cranial Plating. +5, +0, 7 artifacts in play. I guess it would have to be... no, it'd have to be 8. So 5. So it's probably more likely that she two-shots you, I would say. So Thanatos says, I had a player with a big butt commander continue to counter her with Pest in play. That's kind of weird. I mean, initiative scrambles people's brains a little bit. That cognitive dissonance thing is a good thing until you get somebody who doesn't really, like, understand their role at the table, or doesn't really understand initiative, or, the kind of person who, like, swings at you and they're like, so where do I, like, what happens now? And you're like, wait, so you wanted the initiative from me, but you don't know what it's going to do. And, like, we can give some grace to players who are, like, still learning the mechanic, but, like, help people understand what it is that the initiative does and why they should work with you to help you help achieve your mutual goals. And of course, the underside of that too is that ultimately we're the deck that has the ability to regain it and redeploy it at whim. So that does advantage us in some ways, and that's just, like, why initiative is good. So I think initiative, as complicated as it is in terms of the gameplay dynamics and sort of the heuristics around, like, what you do with it in play and what other people do to you, it's one that rewards good decision making very richly. So, okay. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. It's been great hanging out with you all. Hope you all enjoyed the stream. Hope you all enjoyed this breakdown on Rilsa RAEL KINGPIN, this dastardly Dimir commander. She's one of my favorites. I think she's a fantastic choice for Pauper commander right now. And if you're looking to compete with your friends and play some competitive Pauper commander, Rilsa RAEL KINGPIN is a fantastic choice for you. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. Connoisseurs of Fine Common Cardboard, thank you so much for joining me. If you enjoyed the content, feel free to leave a like, comment, tell me another commander that you like to play. if you want to support the channel financially, there's a new membership option that we have that you can go at I believe it's 1, 5, 10, and $50. And we have a bunch of different benefits for that. So consider supporting the channel, even at $1. If everybody in the Discord server donated $1 to what we're doing, it would do amazing things to keeping this a sustainable project where we can continue to push out the finest Pauper Commander content out there for competitive, straight to you and to your eyes. So with that, have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Peace.